The Cuban Missile Crisis was one of the scariest times in history, where the world stood on the edge of a nuclear disaster. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union were in a tense standoff. This was a conflict where both sides had huge nuclear weapons, and neither wanted to appear weak. Everyone was worried about whose next move might lead to total destruction.
The tension really went to a new level when the Soviet Union placed nuclear missiles in Cuba. These weren't just any missiles. They were ready to be fired at major cities like Washington and New York. In reaction, the United States prepared a massive invasion force with thousands of troops gathering in Florida. It felt like at any moment, the world could face a catastrophic nuclear conflict.
Fidel Castro's rise to power in Cuba changed everything. Before he led the revolution in 1959, Cuba was under strong American control. It was a top vacation spot for wealthy Americans, and they also controlled much of Cuba's economy, like banks and sugar plantations. So, when Castro successfully overthrew the government, it was a shock to the United States. They didn't expect a communist leader to take control so close to their shores.
In response, the United States planned the Bay of Pigs invasion to try and remove Castro from power. Kennedy, who had just become president, authorized this mission where 1,500 Cuban exiles trained by the CIA tried to invade Cuba. Unfortunately, it was a total failure. These exiles did not have the local support they needed, and without U.S. air support, they were quickly defeated by Castro's forces. It was a huge embarrassment for the Kennedy administration.
This failure pushed Castro closer to the Soviet Union, looking for protection and support. He nationalized American-owned properties, which didn't sit well with the U.S. However, Khrushchev, the Soviet leader, welcomed Castro with open arms. Khrushchev and Castro developed a close relationship, where Khrushchev saw him almost like a son. This alliance meant the Soviet Union had a strong foothold in the Western Hemisphere.
More than just a political alliance, Khrushchev genuinely admired Castro. He provided significant support to help Cuba withstand any further attempts from the United States. This connection set the stage for the deployment of Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba, bringing the Cold War right to America's doorstep. By the way, if you're interested in getting full transcripts of our episodes, click Join to support us with a membership and help keep this podcast going.
Khrushchev's decision to place nuclear missiles in Cuba was, in many ways, a bold move. He wanted to counter the U.S. presence in Turkey and Italy, where Jupiter missiles were stationed. But perhaps even more critically, he aimed to protect Castro and assure Soviet influence right in the Western Hemisphere. It was a game of chess, and secrecy was the key to Khrushchev's strategy. No one wanted a direct military confrontation.
The Soviet troops had to endure tough conditions for this secrecy. Soldiers traveled hidden below decks of cargo ships, clueless about their destination until they docked. To avoid raising suspicions, they wore civilian clothes once in Cuba. Despite the discomforts, the Soviet personnel were committed to ensuring the success of Khrushchev's gamble. Their vessels crossed the Atlantic, tightly packed and moving quietly.
These ships were accompanied by submarines equipped with nuclear-tipped torpedoes, which added a new layer of threat. The conditions inside the submarines were almost unbearable with high temperatures and cramped space. Yet the commitment remained unshaken. Khrushchev hoped that the mere presence of these weapons would deter further U.S. aggression. He embraced deception with a conviction that remained undeterred.
The deception was working, as the U.S. had not detected the Soviet moves early on. Khrushchev believed this would be a tactical win. Soviet troops remained out of sight, and the whole operation was underway without American intelligence catching on quickly. Khrushchev's confidence was bolstered by such tactical deception, making the situation even more tense for the global stage.
It was a crucial moment when the U-2 spy planes captured photographs of the missile sites in Cuba. These photos were a turning point, revealing that Soviet missiles were not just hypothetical threats, but very real dangers, poised and potentially ready for launch. When these images reached President Kennedy, the gravity of the situation became undeniable. The potential impact of these missiles required urgent consideration and a quick, effective response.
The discovered missile sites posed a serious risk, not just to the U.S., but to global peace. These medium-range ballistic missiles had the capacity to strike critical areas, including Florida, New York, and the heart of America, Washington, D.C. With just minutes to react, millions of lives were at potential risk. The need for a swift and decisive response was profound, as both nations stood on the brink of an unprecedented conflict.
To manage this growing crisis, President Kennedy set up XCOM, a group of trusted advisors tasked with guiding him through the tense diplomatic landscape. The group faced a significant decision point. Should they opt for a naval blockade to cut off further missile supplies, or should they engage in airstrikes to destroy the sites outright? Each option had its own set of risks and could lead to further escalation if not executed carefully.
The choice was not straightforward. A blockade might prevent more shipments, allowing time for negotiation, but it also risked being seen as an act of war. Airstrikes, while more direct, could trigger immediate military retaliation and push both nations toward disaster. The stakes were incredibly high, as every move was meticulously weighed to avoid the dangers of miscalculation. Kennedy's decision would be pivotal in steering the course of history.
As the crisis continued to develop, war was becoming more likely with every passing day. The United States had detailed plans for an invasion ready to go, knowing that such a move could spark a full-scale nuclear conflict. In Florida, military preparations were intense. The state became a hub of activity as soldiers arrived and defense systems were set up, creating an atmosphere that felt like the threshold of war.
The Soviet Union, on the other hand, was also facing its own internal pressures. Khrushchev had to consider his next steps carefully. Sending more missiles or escalating the situation could cause disastrous consequences. Yet retreating could make the Soviet Union appear weak on the global stage. The potential for miscommunication added another layer to this troubling scenario, where a simple misunderstanding could trigger an unimaginable conflict.
Amidst these rising tensions, a faint light of hope appeared as diplomatic messages began to form between the two superpowers. Khrushchev, sensing the danger of the situation, started to show signs of willingness to engage in talks. He explored options that might allow both sides to step back from the brink without admitting defeat. This opened up a narrow window for possible negotiation that could ease the global strain.
The random back and forth between military choices and diplomacy was critical during this period. While missiles were perched and ready on both ends, the idea of discussions brought a slight relief. However, it required a fine balance of strength and understanding, highlighting the thin line the leaders walked to prevent any accidental clash that could lead to war. Every decision was crucial, urging both leaders to act with caution.
As the dawn broke on October 27th, known later as Black Saturday, tensions were at their highest. This crucial day began with Castro writing a letter to Khrushchev. He urged Khrushchev to consider launching a nuclear strike against the United States. Castro feared an imminent invasion, believing a first strike might deter the Americans. His anxiety underlined how fragile the situation had become and how desperate the leaders felt.
While Castro was pushing for aggressive action, both American and Soviet military forces were on extreme alert. The U.S. had nearly reached the brink of launching an invasion, and the Soviets faced pressures to respond firmly. It was a delicate balance, where the threat of miscommunication could have triggered catastrophic consequences. Each side watched the other closely, ready to act if they suspected any aggressive move.
Despite the tense military postures, diplomacy still played a vital role. Behind the scenes, both sides understood the importance of cautious negotiation over hasty military actions. They tried to keep a calm head, seeking ways to diffuse the crisis through talks. This period of restraint showcased the need for level-headedness under extreme pressure and the willingness to prioritize peace over immediate retaliation during uncertain times.
The challenge was in maintaining this balance without appearing weak. Both Kennedy and Khrushchev had to carefully maneuver between strength and negotiation. They knew that a single misstep could lead to an irreversible disaster. The presence of nuclear weapons made every decision critical, with the potential to shape the future of the planet. It was a moment in history where cooler heads had to prevail over the instinct to react.
It's vital to think about the lessons learned from the Cuban Missile Crisis. This event taught the world about the importance of diplomacy and the dangers of brinkmanship. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most intense moments. Please subscribe to our podcast if you want to hear more stories like this. Your support keeps us exploring and sharing important historical events with you.